ladies and gentlemen. I am Danny Jayakodi, the president of the foundation. So good PM to all of you, and welcome to the first of three talks to be given by Brother Billy Tan. After a long period of absence due to COVID pandemic, we welcome back Brother Billy, who is with us online today. Some of you may already know him, as he was still recently the chairman of board of directors and a regular speaker at Wisdom Park. Therefore, he is not new to us or to our foundation. However, as a formality, I feel duty-bound to say a few words about him for the benefit of anyone here who has not previously met Brother Billy. So, according to the information passed on to me, Brother Billy is a retired business development consultant and is certified as a master practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming. Is also a clinical hypnotherapist, a laughter yoga teacher, and laughter ambassador. I must say, these titles are new to me. So, however, because they are Eastern titles, but some of you may know about them. However, in sharing the Dhamma, Brother Billy studied under late Venerable Dr. Punnaji Mahathera and has delivered Dhamma sharing throughout Malaysia and other countries. As I said before, Brother Billy shared the Dhamma extensively in the Philippines as Wisdom Park, Manila, as well as to students of Catholic seminary, universities, theosophical societies, and to inmates at the women's prison, in Metro Manila. Brother Billy is actively raising funds to provide humanitarian and pandemic relief and assistance to underprivileged and marginalized communities in the Philippines, Sri Lanka, and other Asian countries. Brother Billy's talk today is focused on the verse 348 of the Dhammapada and covers the wisdom of letting go of those attachments to memories and emotions that prevent us from achieving the ultimate objective of Buddhists, which is to stop our endless cycle of rebirths. Dhammapada, that is for those who are not aware of it, is a collection of verses, short verses that contains Lord Buddha's words of wisdom expressed in response to various real-life situations that had occurred during his lifetime. On this occasion, we will examine the story of Uggasena, the youth that married a female acrobat. The collection of verses has been compiled and categorized as Dhammapada and has been given its recognition in the Tripitaka. So, without further ado, let us welcome Brother Billy and invite him to deliver his first talk out of his three lectures. So, Brother Billy, the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Brother Danny. Okay. Thank you very much for the very fine introduction, Brother Danny. And thank you very much to Universal Wisdom Foundation for inviting me to share the Dhamma today. As you can see in the topic, it is about letting go of thoughts of the future, thoughts of the past, and thoughts of the present. Basically, these are the thoughts arising in our mind that often hinder us from developing a mind that is stilled. And when the mind is still, it is able to cultivate wisdom, right? So today we're going to take a look at the Dhammapada verse number 348. So I'll just very quickly show you what that verse is, right? Sorry. So the full verse basically says, give up things of the future, the things of the past, the things of the present. Having reached the end of existence with a mind freed from all conditioned things, one will never again undergo birth and decay. Okay, I'll give a more elaborate explanation of the full verse later on. Let's just take a look at the story behind it. Then only we'll come back to take a look at the verse, because this is the verse that the Buddha uttered. And there is a story behind it. And I took the story from the official Dhammapada commentaries, which I will share with you also. So if you would like to, you can download today's slides. And basically, this is the link to download today's slides, Dhammapada March 26, Dhammapada-March 26, using the tiny.cc website, okay? So this is the full link. You may download all the slides that I'll be sharing today. Okay. So let's begin. What is the Dhammapada? So before we actually talk about what is the Dhammapada, we have to take a look at how it all originated. Now, this is a diagram prepared by Venerable Ayasma Agachita, right? That's his name on the top left corner there. Basically, this describes the complete set of chanting. All the monks, the 500 Arahants, got together soon after the passing of the Buddha. See, when the Buddha passed away, they decided to take 3 months rest or 3 full moons rest. After 3 full moons, 500 Arahants, who were the students or the disciples of the Buddha, got together and decided to put together what they want to remember as what the Buddha taught. So during that first council, the first Buddhist council, 3 full moons after the passing of the Buddha, they decided that they wanted to remember these things. And it is called the Sangiti. Sangiti basically means chanting. So in those days, the Dhamma was transmitted through the oral transmission. They chanted. There was no books written at the time. Nothing was put in writing. So they wanted to remember all this. So one of the chief disciples, the attendant of the Buddha, that is Venerable Ananda, who fortunately by the time they convened this first council, he had become enlightened. Ananda was known to have an excellent, like a photographic memory. He could remember every single thing that the Buddha spoke about. So basically, he contributed towards the collection of these things. And in that first meeting, there were only 2 baskets. They call them baskets. The first one is called Vinaya. The second one is called Dhamma. Vinaya basically consists of those rules governing the precepts how the monks and the nuns should behave, right? So the set of rules and code of monastic discipline is called the Patimokkha, found in the Vinaya. And basically there are 227 precepts for the monks, the male disciples of the Buddha, and 311 precepts for the females, the bhikkhunis, right? So these are basically the precepts governing what they should or should not do. That is the Vinaya, the monastic discipline, the code of monastic discipline. So in the bottom half, you will then see under Dhamma, then they put together 5 collections of books. The first collection, Digha Nikaya, is containing those very long discourses of the Buddha. So the Nikayas basically are the collection of the Buddha's direct teaching, his sermons, and also the things that he spoke about, the discourses. So the first one, the Digha Nikaya, are the long discourses, very long. Usually, if you want to print it out, they are more than 10 pages long, okay? Then come the middle length discourses, the Majjhima Nikaya, the second part, and these are called the middle collections. And these are basically the easiest to learn of all the different sutras, all the different discourses. In here, the middle length have a lot of very, very helpful teachings. So for those who are new to Buddhism and you want to pursue proper teachings from the Theravada tradition, I would suggest that you could look into finding sutras in the Majjhima Nikaya. They are not long, they are middle length. So they're usually between 3 to 5 pages long. So it's quite easy to read. They're not like the Digha Nikaya, which is very long. The Digha Nikaya, they're all more than 10 pages long. Okay. So I would highly recommend people who are interested in pursuing the deeper teachings of the Buddha to look into the Majjhima Nikaya, the middle length discourses. Then, of course, the third book is basically subject matter. Certain subjects, what the Buddha uttered, are then put together. Usually these are not very long, short to middle length, right? So sometimes short could mean just a few sentences. They are called connected discourses, basically under certain topics, right? Meditation, metta, right? All these are different topics, so they are grouped under there. Right. Then come the third one, numerical collection. Basically, come the fourth one, numerical collection, the Anguttara Nikaya. This is basically talking about what the Buddha said by giving certain numbers, like when he says the 5 precepts, then there'll be a number 5. So it will be grouped under 5, the book of 5s. Then, of course, when the Buddha spoke about the Eightfold Way, it will be grouped under the book of 8s and so on. So basically, they are numerical, grouped under certain numbering. So like the 3 marks of existence, that will be under a book of 3s, okay? Then come the last one where they couldn't classify exactly what it is, so they all lumped it in and they call it the minor collection. This is basically a collection of various books that they could not specifically classify under the first 4 Nikayas. So it's under this Kudaka Nikaya. This is actually at that time the smallest of the 5 collections. But unfortunately, over the centuries, over the several generations, those monks the senior monks who were responsible for keeping the records of these teachings, they started to add more and more to the Kudaka Nikaya. So today, Kudaka Nikaya is actually now the biggest collection. It is huge, right? It contains so many things now. But in the original Kudaka Nikaya, one of the most important books is the Dhammapada, right? And in the Kudaka Nikaya, one of the most important books is the Dhammapada. And the Dhammapada is commonly referred to as the sayings of the Buddha. These are stanzas that the Buddha uttered. And every stanza that the Buddha uttered, there is some story behind it. So they are grouped into 26 chapters, totally for 243 verses in the Theravada version of the Dhammapada. So this is found inside the minor collection called the Kudaka Nikaya. Now the Dhammapada, with every verse, every stanza the Buddha uttered, there is a story behind it. So if you are really interested, this is also a good starting point to learn about some of the stories, but they are not connected. So it's a mixture of everything from A to Z. But if you are interested, you can download the complete commentary if you wish to. Okay, so this is a link you can use to download the complete commentary. tiny.cc/Dhammapada-commentary. Then you will get all the 243 verses and all the stories behind it. Very interesting reading. So this is good for reading for those of you who are interested. I would strongly recommend that you go through it. So it's quite easy to read. Every story can be very interesting. So today we're going to take a look at a very interesting story from verse 348. And there's this story, actually, I chose this verse because the story behind it is very fascinating. How a person actually, by giving up the imagination of the future, by giving up the memory of the past, by giving up expectations in the present, that person became enlightened there and then. So let's take a look at the story behind how this person, Uggasena, became enlightened. This is the story of Uggasena. So, sorry, I just need to move. Okay, just give me a second. All right. The story of Uggasena. The Buddha spoke this verse with reference to Uggasena while residing at the Jetavana monastery. This Jetavana monastery is the main monastery where the Buddha spent most of the time when he's not traveling to other towns. See, in those days, the Buddha would travel from town to town walking by foot together with the contingents of monks. If he had to travel alone, which is quite rare, when he had to travel alone, he could travel by supernatural powers. He could get from one place to the other without walking through the roads. But when he's with the monks, which is usually the case, with his contingents of disciples, they would all be walking on the road. They would not be riding on any bullock cart or any animals, because riding on the animal causes suffering to the animal. So the Buddha did not allow his disciples or he himself to be riding on animals, riding on the back of a horse or the back of a cow, right? So that doesn't happen. They all walk. So every year in the town of Rajagaha, near where the Buddha was staying, in the town, every year there is a theatrical group made of 500 dancers and acrobats, right? It's like a circus, basically, who comes to town and they perform for the king. They perform in front of the king and they spend about 7 days doing these performances. And they will earn quite a lot from the king and the noblemen in the town. See, this dance group, this theatrical group will travel from town to town, but when they visit other towns, when there's no king there, then they won't be able to earn so much. So only when they come to a town where there is a nobleman or a king, then they're able to earn more. So they love to come to Rajagaha, but they only pass by once a year, and they will perform there for 7 days. Right? So one of the performers is a beautiful young female dancer. And in fact, she's so talented. This is the daughter of one of the senior acrobats. She was able to sing and dance and even somersault on top of a long bamboo pole. Imagine, that is quite a task, quite a feat, right? Quite an achievement. So she would do that, and very captivating. A lot of people get very excited to see her dance. And in the crowd is this young man by the name of Uggasena. Now, Uggasena is one of the youngest sons of a very wealthy man, one of the wealthiest men in town. Right? And in fact, Uggasena himself was known to be a very brilliant scholar. He himself was a very intelligent person. And when he saw this beautiful young dancer singing and somersaulting on top of the pole, he became, very enchanted and amazed at her talent and her skillfulness. And in fact, so much so that he even fell in love with that dancer, even though he didn't know her. He was so enchanted by the skill and the talent of this dancer, and the beautiful singing of this singer and dancer. Right? Now, in the commentary, there was no mention of the name of the dancer. They just mentioned her as the female dancer. That's all. So there was no mention of her name. So Uggasena fell in love with her, and at the end of that day, he went home. And when Uggasena went home, he became very dejected because he really wanted to marry this girl. So he was very dejected because he was not able to have her. He was just an audience in the crowd, so he was not able to marry her because she's the dancer, the daughter of one of the acrobats, and now they are leaving the town after the 7 days. So he started to imagine, and now this is where his imagination came in. He started to imagine in his mind a future with this beautiful dancer as his wife. And he kept telling himself, if I can have her as my wife, I shall live happily. But if I cannot have her, I will rather die right here. So he, is so attached to the idea of wanting to marry this dancer singer. So he was always imagining how he would then marry her and they would raise a family together. So this is his imagination of a future. And of course, that would lead to suffering because he knew that he couldn't have her. So having said that, he became very dejected and despondent. He flung himself down on the bed, feeling so despondent, and he refused to take food. He started to get very depressed about it because now this dance group has left town. So he was not able to marry this young, beautiful dancer singer. Very worried. His mother was very worried. So now the mother went up to him the mother went up to him and started to ask him, son, what is troubling you? So, and then he started to tell the mother what was in his mind. He says, if I can marry that dancer, I shall live happily. But if I cannot have her, I will rather die right here. So in other words, having heard that, the mother got very worried, and the mother went and told the father. So both the mother and the father got together and started to try to pacify him, try to calm him down and say, oh, do not act this way, son. We will bring you another maiden, our equal in birth and wealth. Now, at this point, you must remember in ancient India, even today, although it is not so strongly practiced, but in ancient India, there was a very strong practice of the caste system. That means people from a different category of citizens, they only marry amongst themselves, right? So that is what the parents meant, that they will find his equal in birth and wealth, belonging to the same category. Because the dancer is not in the same category. I'll show you the list here. Basically, there are 4 major categories. The first category is the Brahmins. These are the scholars, the priests, the gurus, and the sages, the teachers, religious teachers, right? So they are called the Brahmins. Then the next group is what Uggasena belongs to, and these are the wealthy people, the noblemen, the rulers, the warriors, the statesmen, the noblemen, and the wealthy. So they are called the Kshatriyas. Then come the third group, which are the merchants and the artisans, right? The farmers, the fishermen, those who have a certain skill and they produce food and they work in industries, in those days, artisans, right? So they are craftsmen. So this is the third group, Vaishyas. So these are the craftsmen, the farmer, the fisherman, people with skills who earn a living from their skillfulness. And this is the group that the acrobat belongs to. So in other words, this dancer and singer and the acrobat, in fact, all the members of that acrobatic troupe belongs to the Vaishyas. They don't belong to the Kshatriyas. Therefore, the parents of Uggasena, being Kshatriya themselves, will say to the son, we will find you the equal in birth and wealth. That means another woman, another beautiful girl from family of Kshatriyas, not from the Vaishyas, right? Because this is basically the hierarchy, the levels. Kshatriya is basically regarded as higher than the Vaishyas, right? Then come the lowest group, and these are the average citizen, the mass populace, the servants, the maids, the workmen, the workers, the laborers. Now, in those days, there was no classification of what they call the untouchables. The untouchable came much later, in modern times. So in those days, they don't have this thing called the untouchables. So there were only 4 categories in those days. Right? So basically, these are the 4 categories, and Uggasena belonged to the Kshatriyas. And the acrobat belongs to the Vaishyas. In ancient India, even in some parts today, the more traditional people, they don't marry across different groups. They always marry only in their own category. right, amongst their own categories. So the father got a bit upset that the son insisted on wanting that acrobat, the dancer. So the father started to argue with the son, but there was nothing the father could do to make the son change his mind, because in his mind he was already imagining raising a family, marrying this dancer, and raising a family with the dancer. So now the father decided to give in. Right? So because he had money, he thought, okay, no choice, I will spend some money and get my son married to this dancer. So the father gave in to his demand. And in those days, they don't negotiate directly. They always use middlemen. So the father solicited the help of the son's best friend and asked him, here is 1,000 pieces of silver. Take this money, go to the dance group, follow the dance group, look for the acrobat, the father of the girl, and offer this money to that acrobat and say to him that my son wants to marry his daughter. So this is really the intention here. So this middleman went ahead and looked for the group and started to explain to the acrobat that the wealthy man is willing to give so much money if he could release his daughter to give to the son in marriage. But the acrobat would not have that. The acrobat doesn't want to lose his daughter. He wants to keep the daughter together. So the acrobat replied, he said, and this is the father of the girl, and he said, I will not give my daughter for money. But if it be true that he cannot live without my daughter, then let him travel about with us. And if he will do this, I will give him my daughter. So in other words, the condition is that Uggasena has to give up his family, leave his family, join the group, and travel from place to place together with the group. So that's the only condition that he can marry the daughter. Right? So the middleman went back and told the parents what happened. Well, when Uggasena heard about it, he was very happy. He wanted to do that, right? Thinking of this, having a family with this dancer. His parents could not stop him, right? So finally, Uggasena decided to leave the family, leave the life of a wealthy son, and join this group of acrobats and dancers. Right? So when he joined the group and he married the girl, he started to travel with them, but he himself is not an acrobat. He had no acrobatic skills. He could not sing, he could not dance, he could not do acrobatic performances. So he was not of much use to the group at all. He couldn't help them. The only thing he could do is to do odd jobs. So as they moved from place to place, from village to village, from town to town, he could only do odd jobs, carrying the boxes, driving the carts, tending to the animals, taking care of little things here and there, washing up. So all this dirty work like a laborer. So he had to do all these things. It's quite tough. Remember, this is a young man who came from a wealthy family. So to him, this is very hard work. This is really suffering. He's now suffering as a result of his original imagination of what he had wanted in life, to marry this dancer and singer. So over time, Uggasena and his wife had a child. The wife gave birth to a son. As she was tending to the son, she sings to the son often. So as she was taking care of the son, she would sing this really terrible song. Basically, you know, the verses go something like that. Oh, you son of the man who keeps watch over the carts, the man who carries boxes and bundles. Oh, you son of the ignorant one who can do nothing. In other words, this song was really looking down and humiliating Uggasena. And of course, it's not a very nice thing to do, that the mother was teaching the child something like that, you know, and eventually if the child were to grow up hearing all this, the child would not respect his father anymore, you know, if he kept hearing this kind of teaching from the mother. So that is actually not good. This was actually causing a lot of hurt to Uggasena because he hurt them. So when he heard this song from time to time, he was really very, very depressed. He knew that his wife was actually referring to him when she sang this song to the sun. And because of that, they started arguing and he was suffering. Now, basically, he's suffering from his present circumstances because his present circumstances is he's no longer the son of a wealthy man. He is now like a laborer working with this group of dancers and acrobats, doing all the odd jobs. And his own wife was despising him. His own wife was singing songs that humiliated him. And I'm sure if other people heard the song, they would also look down upon him. So he was really suffering from his predicament, his present time, his present situation, his predicament. He's really suffering from that. And she would not stop. She kept doing that. Now, Uggasena, as I mentioned before, Uggasena is a very intelligent person. He doesn't take this lying down. He knew he had to do something because he's actually a very smart person, just that he fell madly in love with this girl. So now he knew he needed to do something, right? So he became very agitated and felt very hurt and very depressed. He knew he had to do something. Now, he was sitting there. Then he started to think back about his past, recalling how he was the son of such a wealthy person living in great wealth and comfort, surrounded by servants, and everybody was serving and tending to him, and he didn't have to do one single bit of hard work. But now he had to do all these things. So he recalled his past, and he became so depressed and became very regretful that he had lost the honor and dignity as the son of a wealthy man. Right? So now, thinking of the past, he became very hurt, right? He became very depressed, felt humiliated, and felt that he has lost his honor and dignity. So now he's suffering from thinking about his past. So you see, thinking about the future, he got married, and then he started to suffer. Thinking about his present, he was suffering. Now thinking about his past, he was again suffering. Right? He then reflected on his present predicament. He knew he had to do something. And he realized that he was of not much use to the group of performers except doing all the odd jobs. So now he had an idea. He became very smart, right? He realized for himself, if he wanted to have a better future with the group, he must do something to be one of the performers and not just doing odd jobs. So he had an idea. Now he wanted to join the group in performance. Now he wanted to become a performer. So he approached his father-in-law, the father of his wife, right, who was a senior acrobat, who was teaching all the young acrobats. So now he approached his father-in-law and asked the father-in-law for permission to become his student and requested to be the student of the father-in-law as an acrobat. And of course, the father-in-law didn't mind that. It's a good idea to teach your son-in-law because they like to pass this on generation after generation. So now, since the acrobat, the old elderly acrobat, doesn't have a son, so he decided, okay, it's good to teach the son-in-law. So Uggasena now started to learn. And Uggasena, as I mentioned, is a very intelligent man, hardworking. Right? He's not really dumb at all, not ignorant. He just fell madly in love with the girl, but now he realized he had to do something, so he worked very hard. He trained under the acrobat, day in and day out for 1 whole year. And then he became a very skillful acrobat himself. So skillful that he was actually better than the average acrobat. So skillful that he was even able to perform on top of a pole, just like the way his wife did. Right? So now he's become a really very accomplished and skillful acrobat. And of course, then he would have to start performing. And soon after, and this is some time later, now the group had now come back to the hometown of Uggasena. They came back to Rajagaha. And once again, they had to perform in front of the king for 7 days. And So when the group arrived back into Rajagaha, they made an announcement. And they say that they're very proud to announce that young Uggasena, who was a homegrown boy, right, previously the local boy, now has come back with the group, and he will perform on the last day, the 7th day, right? So they made this public announcement, and everybody was looking forward to that. So on the 7th day, in order to show him off to the crowd, they erected this long pole for Uggasena to perform. And now, with that long pole, Uggasena now climbed up to the top and was ready to do his performance. This was on the 7th day. And of course, they have to time the drum, the music together with the performances. So at the given signal, he would then start performing, and they would start beating the drums and all that. So he started to perform on top of the pole, somersaulted. In fact, he was so skillful, he was able to somersault 7 times continuously on top of the pole and still remain on the pole without falling down. You know, that was quite an excellent performance. Right? And around that time, the Buddha came out of his meditation. Now, I want to mention one very important thing. This is what the Buddha normally does on a daily basis. Early in the morning, he would rise from his quarters, and then he will then go into meditation. And deep in his meditation, nobody could disturb him. After his meditation, then the Buddha would emerge from his quarters, and then he would do what we call scan the environment. He would use his psychic power to look around the whole town and the village nearby to see if everything is going fine, if anybody is in trouble, if anybody needs help, is there any good thing going on, any bad thing going on. So the Buddha wanted to just get a quick glance, right? A review of basically what's going on around the town. And it was from this survey that he saw Uggasena performing. And he saw Uggasena, and he realized firstly that Uggasena is a man of great intellect, and he was able to become so skillful. The Buddha could see all that. He had these 3 knowledges, and one of the knowledges was to be able to see other people's past and how they had come to be. So with that knowledge, he saw what had happened to Uggasena all this while using his psychic powers. So he was able to see all that. And then at the same time, he realized Uggasena is an intelligent person, and he has understood a lot of things in life, and he has worked very hard to become where he is. And because of that, the Buddha thought he is now ready to attain Arahantship. He is now ready to become a noble disciple of the Buddha. Well, the Buddha, one of the things the Buddha knew, you know, whether a person can become one of his noble disciples. He knew it instantly. The same thing he did when he first met Sariputra and Moggallana. He knew instantly they would be his chief disciples. So now, having seen Uggasena with his psychic power, seeing him perform, he realized that Uggasena had the potential to become an Arahant. And because of that, now the Buddha decided to approach the town to go and see Uggasena himself. Okay, so the Buddha went into town. He entered Rajagaha, and as he approached the crowd who were surrounding Uggasena performing, basically in those days in Rajagaha, they all knew who the Buddha was. And every time the Buddha showed up, everybody would just stop what they're doing. They would turn around and pay homage to the Buddha, and then they would then hope that the Buddha will give a discourse, give a short talk to teach them something. So that is usually what happens. And when the Buddha arrived, that is exactly what had happened. Everybody stopped watching Uggasena or admiring and applauding Uggasena. They now turn around to pay attention to the Buddha. So now people stopped watching Uggasena. They were no longer applauding him. Uggasena was on top of the pole, now wondering why everybody stopped looking at him, and everybody is now looking at the Buddha. So when Uggasena saw that he was being neglected and ignored by the crowd, then he sat on top of the pole feeling, again, very disappointed and depressed. After all, he was just a normal human being at that time. So he was feeling very depressed because he's now looking at his own situation, his present moment, his predicament. He worked so hard, but now nobody is watching him anymore. So he thought to himself, here is a feat which it has taken me a whole year to perfect. But when the teacher enters the city, the audience, instead of looking at me, looks at the teacher. My exhibition had failed completely. So he actually told himself, oh, I am a failure. Now people no longer pay attention to me. They prefer to listen to the Buddha. Nobody's interested in what I'm doing, even though I spent a whole year perfecting this skill. So he became very disappointed and depressed about it. Of course, the Buddha knew what was going on. The Buddha knew how he was feeling and what was going through his mind, because the Buddha could read what was going through the mind of Uggasena. So the Buddha summoned Moggallana and said to Moggallana, go and tell this young acrobat that the teacher, the Buddha himself, would like to see him perform. That is good, because now Uggasena get a chance to perform for the Buddha, right? So that's what Moggallana was instructed to do, and he went on to speak to Uggasena, right? And of course, everybody knew Moggallana had psychic power and so on. So Moggallana did not have to climb up to the pole to talk to Uggasena. Moggallana could just project his thoughts to Uggasena, and they can have a conversation. And this is exactly what happened, right? So Moggallana approached Uggasena. Uggasena was still on top of the pole, right? And Uggasena said, Moggallana said to Uggasena, he says, pray look, Uggasena, acrobat of mighty strength, perform for the crowd, make the people laugh. So in other words, he's now given the green light. People are now going to look at you. They're no longer looking at the Buddha anymore. You go ahead and perform. Make everybody laugh and cheer, right? Here it means, laugh here really means cheering him. Make everybody happy and cheer you, you know. So this is good news to Uggasena. And he was very excited. Hearing this, Uggasena was very delighted and thought, wow, doubtless the teacher desires to witness my skill. Now here, you realize when a person's mind thinks of something negative that's going on, well, like when the crowd no longer watched him, he felt very sad. Now he looks at a change of situation. Now the Buddha said he wanted to see him perform. Oh, he got very excited. So people are easily taken away by their thoughts of the moment. If they thought about something nice, they are happy. They thought about something not so nice, they become very sad. So this is really not good. This is the kind of things that Buddha was trying to teach us, not to fall into the trap of our being carried away by our own thoughts. But here is a situation where Uggasena, hearing that the Buddha wanted to watch him watch him perform on top of the pole, he got very excited and feel very happy. It changed his mood. So this is swinging back and forth. The mood would swing. And now he's very happy, okay? So he started to perform. As he balanced himself on the tip of the pole, then he spoke to Moggallana. He says, pray look, elder Moggallana, mighty in wisdom, mighty in magical power. I perform for the crowd. I make the people laugh. Right? Now he's very happy. He will now do his best to make everybody cheer him and see how skillful he is. So he is actually outdoing himself. He's no longer just doing a simple acrobatic stunt. Now he's doing something amazing. So saying, he sprang into the air from the top of the pole and turned 14 somersaults in the air, and lighting on his feet, balanced himself once more on top of the pole. Remember earlier, he only did 7 somersaults and everybody was cheering and applauding. Now, not only did he do somersaults, he did 14. He doubled the number of somersaults. And he did that in the air, mid-air, 14 somersaults, right? And then landed on his feet on top of the pole, on the tip of the pole. Amazing acrobatic stunt, right? And then the Buddha, of course, commented when he saw that performance. Then the Buddha pointed out this very important stanza to Uggasena. He says, then the Buddha spoke to Uggasena. Uggasena, a wise man abandons all attachments to the khandha aggregates and strive to gain liberation from the rounds of rebirth. So what is khandha aggregates? Basically, khandha aggregates is referring to these 5 sensual realms, panchakhandha, our 5 senses, which basically sense what's going on in the environment, from seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. That's basically the activity of the 5 aggregates, the 5 khandhas. So here, khandha aggregates is referring to the seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching of the environment, the existential experiences of the body and mind. Because when the body senses what's going on from seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching, that information is passed to the brain and being processed, and then the mind begins to become aware of what was seen, heard, smelled, tasted, and touched. And this awareness, right, then the mind reacts to it. Now, this is really what the Buddha was pointing out, that if we are attached to this experience, right, we can never gain enlightenment. A wise man abandons all attachment to this khandha aggregates. Right? They don't get attached to what they see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, in order to strive and gain liberation from the rounds of rebirths. Okay. So then the Buddha went on to utter a very important stanza. And this is the verse 348 of the Dhammapada. And the Buddha said, give up the things of the future, give up the things of the past, give up the things of the present. Having reached the end of existence with a mind freed from all conditioned things, one will never again undergo birth and decay. So in a nutshell, this is the meaning that is being conveyed, right? So let's examine the phrase here. This give up things of the future, meaning the mind don't get attached to imagination of what can happen next, what you're imagining that the future is going to be, because the future is something that that hasn't happened yet. Give up the things of the past. That means your memory, bringing back memories of your past experiences. Though the past is something long gone, it won't come back anymore. So by recalling the past, you will only suffer more. Give up things of the present. Here, things of the present simply mean what is already happening right in front of you here and now. It's already happening. You can't change what has already happened right in front of you, right? So basically, if you become attached to it, you begin to have expectations of what is happening in front of you, you will only be suffering. So a person who can give up all these 3, giving up imagination of a future, giving up memory from the past, giving up expectations in the present, then that person would then come to the what we call the end of existence. Here, the end of existence basically refers to the notion that you no longer attach to the experiences of the body and the mind. You're no longer attached to this experience that, oh, this body is me, right? You're no longer thinking this body is me. Because thinking this body is me is the notion of existence. I exist, right? So by giving up these thoughts of future, past, and present, you really are freeing yourself from being attached to the existence. This is the existential experience. So now, with the mind freed from all these conditioned things, you will then attain enlightenment. You will no longer come back to rebirth and decay, meaning you will not return to samsaric existence. You will not be born again and again and again in the samsaric world. So this is really, in a nutshell, what the message that was being conveyed. So now the Buddha actually went on to utter one more verse after this. I'll come to that in a moment. So the Buddha spoke this and pronounced this stanza so that everybody now understood. Uggasena, heard that and he realized what the Buddha meant. As I said, Uggasena is a very intelligent man. So on top of the pole now, he realized what the Buddha meant. Even as he stood poised on the tip of the pole, having realized that, his mind awoke from that. His mind became clear and his mind became very still. He now knew exactly what the Buddha was trying to teach him. And he freed his mind from imagination, memory, and expectations. And because of that, actually, he attained Arahantship right there and then while he was standing on top of the pole. Amazing. That's why I say this is an incredible story. But this came from the Dhammapada commentary, right? The commentaries are not what the Buddha said exactly. In other words, all these are actually stories that were told by all the highly learned monks over the centuries, and they get collected into the commentaries, right? So this is the explanation of what had transpired on that occasion. So immediately after that, Uggasena quickly came down from the pole. He jumped down actually very quickly, swiftly alighted from the pole. So he literally jumped down from this very tall pole. And he went up to the Buddha and paid homage to the Buddha and saluted the Buddha, meaning he went down on his five. That means two palms down, two knees down, and his head down, 5 points. 5-point salutation to the Buddha. And then he asked the Buddha for permission to join the order of the monks. In other words, he would give up his family and become one of Buddha's disciples, because he had already become enlightened at this moment in time. But nobody knew about it. Only Buddha knew about it. And of course, Moggallana would know about it. So only the enlightened people knew that Uggasena at that point in time had just become enlightened. He had become an Arahant. And now, after becoming an Arahant, he approached the Buddha asking permission to become a monk. And of course, Buddha will always accept them, right? And the Buddha gave a very simple answer: come, monk. In other words, the Buddha already now called him a monk. That means the Buddha had accepted that he is a monk. And basically, this moment, Uggasena would be considered as having been ordained as a monk. And because the Buddha stretched out his hand and said to Uggasena, come, monk. Already the Buddha called him monk. So now Uggasena had become a disciple of the Buddha, a monk. And in fact, to be a monk, you need to wear robes and you need to have an alms bowl. But nobody gave those things to Uggasena. But because of the circumstances at the time, with the help of Moggallana and so on, there was this ability to produce these 8 requisites, right? So instantaneously, Uggasena was supernaturally provided with the 8 requisites of a monk and transformed into an elder of 60. Amazingly, then that Uggasena actually became a person who looked like an elderly of 60, right? And referring to Uggasena, rapid descent from the pole, all the other monks who didn't know that he had become enlightened, they weren't aware of that. They saw Uggasena come down so quickly, jump down from a very high pole and landed on his feet without hurting himself. So they were curious. They went up to Uggasena and asked him, brother, had you no fear as you descended from the pole of such great height? They didn't know he was enlightened already. So they asked him such an innocent question, thinking that he's just an ordinary acrobat. And now Uggasena had already become enlightened. So he answered, no, brothers, I have no fear. Now, all these young monks who were standing by, who were not enlightened, they didn't know what was going on. They didn't know that Uggasena had become enlightened. So they was wondering why he said he had no fear. Everybody would have fear jumping down from such a tall pole, right? So the monk were unhappy about what they heard from Uggasena. They went up to the Buddha and reported to the Buddha and said that Uggasena said he has no fear. And they were actually claiming that because Uggasena said he had no fear, Uggasena must be telling a lie, right? But they didn't realize that Uggasena had already become an Arahant. An Arahant has no fear, right? So they didn't know that. So they reported to the Buddha and said that Uggasena must be telling a lie. He can't be jumping down from such height without fear. So the Buddha responded. And this is the time when the Buddha explained how Uggasena had become an Arahant. So the Buddha responded to the young monks and said, monks, those monks who, like my son Uggasena, having severed all attachments, have no fear or perturbation. Okay. So one of the things is when the Buddha ordains a monk who has become enlightened, the Buddha often likes to refer to that monk as his son, right? So in other words, this is the son in Dharma, not as an actual son, not as an adopted son, but a son in the Dharma. So basically, the Buddha said, those monks who, like Uggasena, having severed all attachments, have no fear or perturbation. Now, in the Pali commentary, the perturbation was referring to this very important Pali phrase, akupa ceto vimutti. Akupa basically means perfect stillness, no shaking, right? So in other words, it's perfect stillness. Ceto is the mind, right? It came from the same word as chitta, the mind. Akupa ceto vimutti means freedom or liberation or emancipation. In other words, a person who had become an Arahant. When you say a person has attained akupa ceto vimutti, you're basically saying now that person had become an Arahant because his mind is completely liberated from suffering, and his mind is perfectly stilled. So that's Buddha's explanation that Uggasena is now an Arahant, right? So akupa ceto vimutti. And the Buddha then went on to pronounce one more stanza. And this is listed under Dhammapada, verse number 397. The Buddha then uttered this stanza to all the monks. He says, he that has severed every attachment, he that trembles not, he that is past the bonds and is unshackled, such a man I call a Brahman. Okay. So here, when the Buddha said sever every attachment, so basically a person who has freed himself from clinging to anything. He that trembles not, that means a person who doesn't cling to anything, he's perfectly still. Akupa, right? So this severing from attachment is ceto vimutti, and trembles not is akupa. So that's why it's called akupa ceto vimutti, a person who has become enlightened. He has passed the bonds. That means he's no longer bonded to samsara. He will no longer be reborn again in the future. Okay, after he dies, he will no longer be reborn. He that is past the bonds and is unshackled, no longer bonded to samsaric world, such a man I call a Brahman. Now, this word Brahman, when the Buddha spoke this word Brahman, the Buddha normally is referring to an Arahant. This word Brahman is referring to an Arahant. Okay, realize that the Brahman is not the same as the Brahma, even though it comes from the same root word. In the Hindu tradition, the word Brahma refers to their god, Brahma. But a Brahman is not referring to that. Here, the Brahman is referring to what we would call an enlightened noble disciple of the Buddha. So in other words, when the Buddha uses this term, Brahman, he's referring to an enlightened disciple, one of his enlightened disciples. So basically here, the Buddha was pointing out how a person can become an enlightened disciple. Okay. So this is the verse, give up the things of the future, the things of the past, the things of the present, having reached the end of existence with a mind freed from all conditioned things, one will never again undergo birth and decay. One will actually no longer come back to the samsaric world. Okay. And of course, that second part where the Buddha said, he that has severed every attachment, he that trembles not, he that is past the bonds and is unshackled, such a man I call a Brahman. akupacheto vimutti. Okay. Now there's another verse very similar to this. Right? Well, actually, we have come to the end of the story. So that is the end of that story and the 2 verses. There's another verse in the Dhammapada that is very similar to this. This is Dhammapada 406. It basically says, he who is friendly amidst the hostile. That means when people are fighting amongst themselves, he can remain calm and peaceful. He who is peaceful amidst the violent. In other words, when people get angry and they start to hurt each other, and you can still maintain your state of calm and peace. And unattached amidst the attached. That means you're not like others who are attached to sensual pleasures and so on. Him do I call a Brahmin. So in other words, here again, the Buddha was pointing out that if you can do that, then you will be able to reach that state where the Buddha can refer to you as a Brahmin. Okay. I won't go into the story. In fact, the story of Dhammapada verse 406 is also very interesting, but we don't have that much time. So I don't, maybe we can do this sometime in the future. So I won't go into that, but I'm just showing you this verse, which basically refers to the same thing, the person who can maintain his calm and peace and stillness of mind and free himself from attachment. This is really the way that you can become enlightened, if you're able to cultivate and practice these. So now I want to share with you a very interesting short talk, short mention by my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, the late Venerable Dr. Punaji. He has passed away in 2018, but I'd like to share with you what he said about this thing where we have to understand the Four Noble Truths and not get attached to birth and existence. So let's listen to what he has to say.
In that Sabbasava Sutra, the Buddha points out that the normal person thinks, did I exist in the past? How did I exist in the past? In what way did I exist in the past? Will I be existing in the future? In what form will I exist in the future? Do I exist now? In what form do I exist now? In other words, the normal person is thinking in terms of the past, present and future. And that way of thinking confirms the idea, I exist. And if you hold on to that idea, I exist, you will never be able to gain freedom from suffering. In other words, to be thinking of karma and rebirth is to be unable to gain freedom from suffering. And then the Buddha points out the Arya Savaka, the disciple of the Buddha, doesn't think in that way. He's only thinking, what is suffering? What is the cause of suffering? What is the ending of suffering? And what is the way to end suffering? If he begins to think in that way, that person's suffering will come to an end.
Okay, this is what Bhante was mentioning, the freedom from suffering. That there is thinking about the future, right? How will I exist in the future? Thinking about the past, how did I exist in the past? Thinking about the present, how am I existing in the present? These are all existential experiences of the body and mind. Basically, the aggregates are arising. We are constantly seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. And with this arising, the mind begins to think, begins to have imagination, begins to have expectations, begins to have memory, recalling, and so on. So all this is really going on in the mind, okay? If we were to have this attachment to this notion, I exist. Now, as long as we keep getting attached to this notion, I exist, we can never gain freedom from suffering. Right? The development of the mind to be free from suffering, one of the things we have to cultivate is to break free from this I exist. Because very often when the body experiences something, we think that this body is me. And this condition is called Sakkaya Ditthi, one of the first three fetters we have to abandon in order to become a Sotapan. So this I exist is the experience of the body, thinking this experience of the body defines this self I call me, I, me, or mine. And if we keep getting attached to this notion, we can never be free from suffering. And Bhante was saying that the noble disciples of the Buddha, the Arya Savaka, these are basically the people who study directly under the Buddha, the direct disciples of the Buddha. They are only focused on the Four Noble Truths. What is suffering? What are the causes of suffering? And what is the freedom from all suffering? And the way leading to the freedom from all suffering. So these are the Four Noble Truths. So the direct disciples of the Buddha. And this is the same for all of us. If we really want to train ourselves using the teachings of the Buddha, the important thing for us to study and understand is the Four Noble Truths. Not getting carried away with karma and rebirth. Karma and rebirth exist. I mean, they are there. It's happening all the time. But our mind must be focused on the study and understanding of the Four Noble Truths, right? Then only we can free ourselves from the samsaric world. If we train our minds to stay focused on the Four Noble Truths and not be attached to the notion of existence, we will be able to gain freedom from all suffering. And that's what Bhante Punnaji was saying. He's not saying that there's no karma and rebirth. That's not what he was saying. There is. It's just that our mind must be trained. We must train ourselves to stay focused on understanding the Four Noble Truths. Knowing that karma and rebirth is happening all the time. Samsaric world is constantly happening. We have to now train ourselves to fully understand the doctrine of the Buddha. And the doctrine of the Buddha is the Four Noble Truths, the fundamental teachings of the Buddha, the Four Noble Truths. So we have to understand that. So now, this last part, the story of Uggasena, there is this last part I'd like to then recall, right? Where the Buddha said to Uggasena, a wise man abandons all attachments to khandha aggregates. That means what you see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, you don't get attached to it. And you strive to gain liberation from the rounds of rebirth, from samsara, by simply abandoning these attachments. And the khandha aggregates is talking about this existential experience of the body and mind. Attachment, the Pali word for that, in this, the Pali word behind this word attachment here is upadana, which is sometimes also translated as clinging or grasping. And Bhante Punnaji explained that it is personalizing the subjective and objective experience. Objective experience refers to the experience of the body, the senses, able to sense what's going on around you. So that is what is called the objective experience. We sense activities of objects, the objective experience, and they arise in the mind, and we become aware of this objective experience, and this awareness leads to subjective experience. The mind begins to think, then this is the subjective experience. The I, me, or mine arises. We become aware of what's going on. So that if we cling on to that, this is the process of upadana, then we will never be free from the samsaric world. Right? And the important thing is to focus on the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths was first spoken by the Buddha in the first sermon delivered by the Buddha, the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutra, setting into motion the wheel of Dharma, where the Buddha explained the first noble truth is dukkha. There is dukkha, there is suffering, and there are various conditions of suffering. And this we have to understand, to be understood. And this is in the sutra where it's mentioned that the conditions of dukkha has to be understood. And the second is samudaya, which is the origin or the causes of the dukkha. What causes suffering? What is the origin of suffering? So this has to be abandoned. So when you realize what causes suffering, you have to let it go. And one of the causes of suffering is craving. Right? Craving is the fundamental cause of suffering. It leads to attachment, clinging. Craving leads to clinging. These are very thoroughly explained in the dependent origination. So I won't go into that for now, but basically pointing out the Four Noble Truths to be understood. So this second one is the causes of suffering, the origin of suffering. Suffering, we have to understand and learn to let go, letting go. And the mind thinking about, imagining about a future, we are actually clinging on to the thoughts of a future. And the mind recalling the past from memory, we are now clinging on to a memory of the past. And if the mind looking at the present and begin to have certain expectations of the present, which is already happening, we can't change that, it's already happening in front of us, then we are clinging on, right, to expectations. Imagination, memory, and expectations. These things we are clinging on. So that has to be abandoned. Give it up, let go. And then we can bring suffering to an end, nirodha, the ending of suffering. And this, if we learn how to practice this, we can then accomplish this. We can realize this, right? We can develop and realize this, nirodha, right? The giving up of all suffering. This has to be realized. And how can we do that? The Fourth Noble Truth clearly explains the way leading to the cessation of suffering, the magga, okay? So these are the Four Noble Truths that we must study and understand, right? And practice to be cultivated. So the way leading to the cessation of suffering is to be cultivated. Now I want to share with you one last short clip from my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punaji, where he was explaining about the Arahant who has freed himself, broken the bonds of existence.
Thus, Arahants achieve the perfection in goodness.
Whether the Arahant can reach the state of perfection?
Yeah.
Well, the word Arahant really means one who has reached perfection. So there is nothing more to be done. The Buddha is also an Arahant. That's why we say, Itipiso Bhagava Arahant Samma Sambuddho. The Arahant means, we have to understand this word Arahant. Ara means a fetter. Fetter means a bond. Bond. That if you take a rope and tie a person, that rope is Ara. Ara means the rope. Hang means to break that rope. Because we are tied to the concept of existence or being. We think, we are dreaming that we are existing. So that existence itself is the problem. Because the Buddha spoke of existence, the word that he used was bhava. Existence is bhava. And so we have to awaken from that dream of existence. So the word Buddha means one who has awakened. So, but to awaken, we have to break the bonds that we are tied to this concept of existence. So, Arahant, Samma Sambuddho means the one who has broken the bonds and awakened from the dream of existence.
So now I'd like to then conclude my own explanation on the conclusion of what we have covered so far, right? Imagination of a future that has not happened. That is what we often do. The mind does that. And memory of a past that is long gone. It can never come back. It's gone. It's finished. And expectations in the present that is already happening in front of us. We are not able to change what is already right there and then in front of us. It's already happening. All this, we are very often attached to it. These are but transient experiences of existence, which are unstable, rising and fading, and impermanent. And that's why the Buddha pointed out the three marks of existence. The first is impermanence, anicca. So imagination, memory, expectation, basically these are referring to activities that are part of the anicca, things that are rising, transient experiences. But we often get attached to it. When we get attached to it, attachment to transient experiences only lead to stress, dissatisfactoriness, fears, and suffering, dukkha, right? And of course, the Buddha pointed out the three marks of existence, anicca, dukkha, and anatta. So transient experiences are condition arising, things that arise as a result of the presence of the necessary conditions. They are devoid of a self. They are arising because of the necessary conditions. There is no self behind all these activities that are arising. It is impersonal, it is impermanent, and it is empty of self. Anatta, okay? Anicca, dukkha, anatta. So if one can free oneself from such attachments and focus on moment-to-moment cultivation to develop wisdom, the ultimate realization of what reality is all about, this panya, ultimate wisdom. This will lead to freedom from the cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death in the samsaric world. And that is the samsara. And so with that, I conclude my presentation. I hope this has been helpful. So I think we can now go into questions, reminding you to download that. I will only answer questions related to today's sharing. So Brother Danny, I pass on the mic back to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Brother Billy. Extremely interesting story, followed by the good explanation of the verse as well as various other commentaries, taking us into a little bit more into the depths of the Four Noble Truths. Very appropriate. Thank you so much. I do, because the time has already gone, I think we are nearly 4:30 p.m. So I will not go over your material again, except just to make just one comment, an observation I made from the story, that is the human behavior and human emotions have really not changed much at all, despite all technological developments. What was going on in 2,500 years ago about the social issues, the culture, and the issues about getting marriage and their emotions are exactly as it is. It was as it is today. And the other thing is that how love, very close attachment to your fiance or your wife can change pretty quickly into either hatred or regret or depression based on perturbations of the mind, based on the change of conditions. So it is also a lesson for all of us as well in present day in our daily life. So I will leave it there as far as my comments are concerned, and I will leave it to the audience to ask any questions, seeking clarification, and so on and so forth. So please raise your hand. Sorry, maybe I can't see you all, so best thing is to unmute yourself and ask the question directly.
Dr. Danny, we have a question from Mr. Stephen C.
Yes, I see I see it in the chat.
Is there a comment? Stephen.
Chat.
Okay, from Stephen Sai, I can see, Brother Billy, isn't it impossible to abandon the past, present and future concerns in the natural course of one's work or business life? Does it mean we need to live like a monk to achieve the above? I can also comment on it, but I'll let you comment on it, Brother Billy.
Okay, I'll be happy to answer that question. The short answer to your question, Brother C, is yes. You have to basically live like a monk, because the Buddha did point out that it's only when you are able to give up this home life that then you are able to bring yourself to reach that ultimate state where you can become free from all suffering. You can attain the highest and most supreme bliss of Nibbana and become enlightened. So in other words, as long as you have a household life, as long as you're running a business, as long as you have a family to attend to, as long as you have to take care of the daily chores of livelihood, you can never be enlightened. This is the message of the Buddha, that to be enlightened, you really have to give up all this household life. There are people who are not monks and became enlightened, not because they did not not because they gave up the household life, but because in their daily practice, they had abandoned all these household attachments. And in the story, you can see when Uggasena was right on top of the pole, when he finished his performance, he heard the Buddha's stanza. It woke him up, and that moment of awakening, he had abandoned in his mind all thoughts of his wife or his child or whatever, and he became enlightened. So when he came down from the pole, he asked the Buddha, he would then become a monk. He would join the order of the monk. So yes, the short answer, yes, you have to give up household life, give up your business, give up your family in order to reach that state. This is why monks all have to give up their family life. Okay, so I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much, Brother Billy.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Brother Billy, for that comment. Stephen, do you have any supplementary questions in response?
Actually, no more. I think that answers it. But it's just disappointing that you cannot achieve the goals of enlightenment if you are still attached to your work and your business.
But Brother Stephen, you just said it yourself. It is disappointing or whatever. Well, that is it. If you start to have desires, fears, anger, hatreds, and attachments, you can never be enlightened. And right now, what you just said is you're disappointed, and that it itself is a reflection that you can never be abandoned as long as this daily household routine is attaching you to whatever else is going on around you. Okay. I think there's one more question there.
Yes, there is one. I can't read the name of the person who is sending it. Then it says, if we will just accept that we cannot change what is happening, is this not being passive in the midst of oppression and suffering in society?
Okay, I would also like to elaborate on that second Dhammapada verse 406 I was talking about, to be peaceful amongst the violent people and so on. You see, it is not that you should not do anything about something that's going on. What is important is that if something is happening there in front of you, and it is within your power to do something to help somebody, by all means, do that. It is basically when it is beyond your power, which a lot of things is happening to us right now today. The coronavirus pandemic, it is beyond any one of us to stop that. So don't even try to stop it. Just be part of the positive activity that helps each other to free ourselves from getting infected with it by wearing masks, by practicing the standard operating procedures, by doing the right things and all that, you know. So there is a part of action we can take, and that action is to learn how to live in this present moment and deal with the situation in a peaceful way. The other situation we all know that happened in the past 1 month is this Ukraine conflict. What can we do about it? Can we go and do something about it? Okay, some people do. They fly there and they volunteer the service. Fine, great, good for them. But if you are not willing to do that, if you're not willing to catch the next flight to go into Ukraine and join the Ukraine army to fight against the oppressors, then the next best thing for you to do is to learn to be peaceful about it. And if you are peaceful about it, then at least there is one person, you, in this whole world who is experiencing peace, right? So it's important that if it is something beyond your control, something you are powerless to change, learn to be peaceful with it. It is not about being passive and not doing anything. It's about detaching from the emotions of it. Detaching doesn't mean don't care. Don't misunderstand that. The Buddha has taught about caring, and it's called metta, loving kindness, universal benevolence. We must practice that. And this is some of the things we can do, is that we can see other marginalized communities, poor communities that are not able to get food or education. If we can contribute, we can raise funds, or we can donate to provide education for their children, do that. This is really what it is. This is all about universal benevolence. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here from all this, it's not that we should be passive. No, we should free ourselves from the emotions, but we can still do something about improving the life of the people around us and the lives that we can touch. So it's not about being passive. It's about detaching from the emotions of it. At this point, I'd like to just allow me a couple more minutes. I want to elaborate on the difference between sympathy and empathy. A lot of people have misunderstood, thinking that sympathy is loving kindness. No, sympathy is a self-centered emotions. When you see somebody suffering and you say to yourself, I am so sorry that person is suffering. What is it that you're saying? What is the first word that you're saying? I. So you're really talking about your own emotions. So sympathy is really self-centered emotions being expressed. Empathy is different. Empathy is understanding how other people are feeling when they are going through that difficult situation. So practice empathy. Understand that people are suffering. There is something you can do about it. It's not about how you feel about it. Right? Sympathy is about how you feel about it. And that's not the point. The Buddha was talking about metta, loving kindness. Loving kindness is not about how you feel about what's going on. Loving kindness is about what you're going to do about it, right? Empathy. So practice empathy and practice loving kindness, not sympathy. Sympathy is self-centered emotions, feeling sorry, right? So that is not really proactive. So I hope that explains, that helps to clarify that situation?
Okay, thank you very much indeed. I have got another question and some words of appreciation. I'll take that first. Words of appreciation from Jerome. Wonderful research, Brother Billy. Thank you very much. And the outstanding question, another question. Hello, Brother Billy. How can I, it's coming from someone called Dirty. I can't understand the name, must be a nickname. How can I be ordained as monk, if I may ask?
Okay, so if
Difficult
you really,
question.
yeah, if you really want to be ordained as a monk, you have to approach a teacher in a monastery. So if you do not know who to approach, it depends on whether you are thinking of a particular tradition or you are open to anything, right? Unfortunately, in the Philippines, I do not personally know of a place in the Philippines where you can be ordained as a monk. Perhaps with the exception of maybe the Mabuhay temple or whatever, I don't know. You have to ask them. But you can go to countries like Thailand, you can go to countries like Myanmar, and those are Theravada traditions. So if you are not thinking of a specific tradition, you can also go to other places like Taiwan, where they have the Mahayana traditions. So those are the places where you have temples, where they have teachers, and they are able to teach you and guide you. And eventually, after you learn something from them, you first become ordained as a samanera, or what we call a novice monk. You don't get ordained to a higher monk right away. The correct thing to do is to become a novice monk and live the life of a novice monk. That means you are practicing certain practices of a monk for a few years. And when you are ready, then you can take the higher ordination and become a fully ordained monk. So normally the correct path is first to become a novice monk. After a few years, it depends on your teacher, depends on how good you are. Normally it is 5 years, but some teachers may allow shorter than that, but generally it is 5 years at least, right? So after living the life of a novice monk, then you can be ordained with a higher monk, higher ordained monk or fully ordained monk, okay? So unfortunately, I think in the Philippines, you don't have a place that can do that for you. So you will have to then contact some people in Thailand, Myanmar, or Sri Lanka, or if you want the Mahayana traditions, then it can be Taiwan. In Taiwan, there are many temples, including the temples that is in charge of Mabuhay Temple, that is the Fo Guangshan in Kaohsiung, and there are a few others in Taiwan. So those are the places you can seek ordination.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe one can observe the 10 precepts and as a lay Buddhist, and see whether one has the discipline to observe them for a very long period. That's one way of approaching to become a monk in progressive way. So an interesting question. I personally haven't tried it, but I do not know if anybody else have tried it in here. But I think it can be done in Burma, isn't it? You can maybe in Thailand as well, to go and become a monk for a short period and see whether you can maintain the discipline of a monk. It is a very difficult task. So there you are, a courageous thing to do.